From advertising to software as a service to data.
Across all of our programs and clients, we've seen a 55 to 65% open rate.
Getting brands authentically integrated into content performs better than TV advertising.
Typical lifespan of an article is about 24 to 36 hours.
If we're reaching out to the right person with the right message and a clear call to action, then it's just a matter of timing.
Welcome to the Martech Podcast, a Ben J. Schaap LLC production. In this podcast, you'll hear the stories of world-class marketers that use technology to drive business results and achieve career success. We'll unearth the real-world experiences of some of the brightest minds in the marketing and technology space so you can learn the tools, tips, and tricks they've learned along the way. Now here's the host of the Martech Podcast, Benjamin Shapiro.
Welcome to Content Business Week on the Martech Podcast. This week, we're going to talk about everything we've learned over the past 2.5 years running a monetizable content business. Each day this week, we're going to publish an episode that walks you through how you can create, publish, syndicate, monetize, and scale a business where content is the product. Joining me today is the man behind the scenes here at the Martech Podcast, my head of content production, Mr. Todd Hines. So far this week, Todd and I have discussed how you can find and vet guests for your content business, how you can think about content publishing and syndication. Yesterday, we talked about monetization. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the people that matter, your audience, and how to increase their engagement. Okay, here's the fourth installment of Content Business Week with me and Todd Hines. Todd, welcome back to the Martech Podcast and Content Business Week.
Thanks, Ben. It's been a great week so far.
It's been wonderful to sit down in the same room and talk to somebody. It's like the coronavirus never happened.
That's right. We can pretend.
I know. It's great. This is what real life used to be like. And hey, look, we're talking about running a content business. We've basically been trapped in this room together, not seeing anybody for about 4 months between the hours of 10 or 11 to 4 or 5. This is all we've been doing, all we've been thinking about. And one of the things that we've been really focused on in terms of strategy and planning for the last 3 months has been figuring out how to increase our audience engagement. Tell everybody how we're thinking about building new channels and other ways to engage our audience.
A couple things, namely newsletter, second, a community. And those are pretty broad, but we're thinking about community in terms of networking, learning, collaboration in a Slack environment, Slack platform. And then in parallel, growing our reach through a newsletter where we can either repurpose or take our content and put it in a format that's great for newsletter and then grow our audience that way.
Yeah. So with content businesses in general, my advice is you start with one channel. If I'm creating a content business like we did, we started thinking about podcasts. I did not start this project thinking I'm going to create the Martech Podcast and the Martech blog and the Martech video series and the Martech events and the Martech community and the Martech. It would have been too much to tackle all at once. You need to get a foothold in one channel. Do what you do well. And this depends on what inherent talent you have. I have hopefully been born with the gift of gab. I cannot write. I cannot spell. Todd, how many times have I asked you to double check and spell check my sales outreach emails?
More times than I can count.
Thousands of times. It's a lot. But I knew that I could talk and do that relatively well. I was at least had some inherent talent to be a podcast host. So that's really where we started our content journey. Now, at some point, we are getting to the point where, great, we have credibility and an audience in the podcast space, and we want to provide incremental value to them. So to me, when you start thinking about increasing your audience engagement, it has to do with understanding who your audience is. So Todd, for the last couple of months, we've gone through a couple different steps of trying to learn who our audience is and what their needs are. Walk through what our process was for finding who our audience was and learning about them.
We realized that this was an opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about our audience. And so we started to proactively reach out to people who are friends of the show, so to speak, former guests, and ask where they were gaining value from the show and where they would like to see more. We also did a really, I think, very basic but very effective survey on LinkedIn, where we reached out to Ben's network, which is extensive on LinkedIn, And he posed the question, what would you like to see more of? What do you think would be most valuable to you? And then taking that response and really just getting back to basics and let's ask our audience and let's listen to what they're thinking. And it kind of helps us to get out of our own heads a little bit, and not so much just what we imagine where we're adding value, but just going right to our audience and figuring out from them.
There's a fine line of being the content producer and trusting your gut in terms of what you think is going to be effective in terms of influencing your audience, and then asking your audience and not just subjectively creating content and tools. This is really more product management than it is content production, right? You can kind of be a little bit more instinctual, in my opinion, with content production. When you're doubling down, you're thinking about expanding to different channels, do your homework. Go talk to 10 people that are your customers and ask them what they want. Run a couple surveys. The survey that we ran on LinkedIn was very simple. It was, what would you like more of from the MarTech podcast? Would you like newsletters, communities, courses, or more podcasts? And the answer was a resounding, we want community and we want courses. And so those are the things that we're working on. Now the question is, what does our audience mean by we want a community? Or what do they mean by we want courses, and what's the content? We have to dig a little deeper. And so we're constantly trying to build in feedback loops to understand how to engage with our audience. Now, I think one of the important things to think about is engaging with your audience is important, but if you already have one established channel, you already have engaged with them. So why does it matter? And to me, this is about cultivating a deeper relationship, more stickiness, but it's also going to create other monetization channels for you. So I'll give you an example of how we're thinking now that we've talked to our audience, you, about what you want from the MarTech community, and it has been community and courses. So our plan is we're going to launch some sort of a community, most likely on Slack. That is going to help us collect email addresses, because if you sign up for our community, you have to give us your contact information. That'll subscribe you to our once a week newsletter. And now we have another vehicle that allows us to distribute our content, talk about some of the courses that we might be making, and also gives us an opportunity to talk about our sponsors. So we're cultivating another interactive channel in newsletters. We also have the same thing within our community, where we're not just going to come onto the community and only talk about our sponsors, but it gives us a vehicle for them to participate in the conversation as well. It helps us by deepening the audience engagement. It gives us more touch points to be able to monetize the content and the relationships that we're creating.
So Ben, we've talked about engaging people that are in our current audience. We've talked about the importance of reaching beyond our current audience and also engaging with other people. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, engaging your audience is very important. I also think that engaging the other partners or content creators is important too. The example for us is we will create marketing assets for our guests so they can help us with content syndication. We will try to deepen our relationship with our sponsors by providing them discounts for additional sponsorship campaigns. We will reach out to other podcasters and we will do podcast guesting where I'll be on their show and they'll come on mine. So there's other ways for you to drive engagement, not just necessarily with your audience, but with other sort of constituents within your business that provide value. Now, they're not necessarily monetization. I'm not trying to sell other podcasters anything. I'm just trying to get to know them, learn a little bit about the podcasting business, talk shop, share value. People that are our guests, they serve as a marketing vehicle, and at times they turn into our sponsors. But in general, just building relationships and finding ways to stay engaged with the people that are interested and relevant to your brand is a really important thing to think about. And no matter what part of our business, whether it's the content that we produce, the sponsorship relationships that we've cultivated, the people that are listening to the podcast, we do our best to try to find ways to continually re-engage with them. And that's one of the reasons why we want to build a community, whether it's Slack or some other channel, why we want to launch our newsletters. We're looking for other ways to stay in front of and relevant to the audience and to the community at large, because that's at the end going to sort of raise the water level and hopefully our boat with it.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, I think that there's a couple different things that you need to think about when it comes to audience engagement. A lot of times, this means that you're expanding beyond one key channel, and you have to be very careful. you can get distracted from your core business. It's one of the things that we've been trying to focus on is let's make sure that we continue to produce great content and make sure that we are providing the same type of value to our listeners, to our sponsors, that they expect of the show before we start thinking about expansion into other places. You don't want to try to be too many things to too many people. And it's very important for you to establish credibility in one channel and be consistent over time and stay present there and try to add on other channels as you can. And over time, you'll start to build a bigger and more successful content business. So that wraps up this episode of the Martech Podcast. Thanks for listening to Todd and my conversation. If you'd like to hear more of our tips about running a content business, we're going to publish an episode every day this week. So hit the subscribe button in your podcast app and check back with us tomorrow morning when we talk about repurposing content. Just one more link in our show notes I'd like to tell you about. If you didn't have a chance to take notes while you were listening to this podcast, head over to martechpod.com where we have summaries of all of our episodes, contact information for our guests. You can subscribe to our once-a-week newsletter. You can even send us your topic suggestions or your marketing questions, which we'll answer live on our show. Of course, you can always reach out on social media. Our handle is MarTechPod, MarTechPod, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or you can contact me directly. My handle is Ben J. Shap, BenJShap. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you want a daily stream of marketing and technology knowledge in your podcast feed, we're going to publish an episode every day this year. So hit that subscribe button in your podcast app and we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. All right, that's it for today. But until next time, my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.